Breaking Barriers.
Hello, I'm Gary Bontrager. I am your host at Breaking Barriers podcast. We're excited for our guest today. This man is not somebody that I knew a month or two ago, and I've never met him, but he comes with extremely high regard, and it is my honor to have an interview with Fred Nichols. I understand that he really was a pioneer in various aspects of the sport of tractor pulling, and when I hear stories about Fred, the thing that I hear is what a great man he was, not only what he contributed to the sport of tractor pulling, but also what he has done just in the community and how he relates to people. And to hear how his grandkids and kids admire him is just a feat that probably most of us can often only dream of. Must be a man of extreme character. And his granddaughters, I know, admire him greatly. They kind of toss it off a little bit like maybe they're prejudiced, but I believe they have good reason to be. So I'm excited to visit with Fred, get some history on the tractor pulling part of it. I know he was very successful. He campaigned John Deere tractors, was very successful with diesel, and then was a pioneer when he moved into the alcohol, which was really unheard of back in the 70s. So those are some of the topics we're going to discuss. And without much further ado, we're going to bring Fred on here and get this party started. So Fred Nichols, I want to welcome you to the Breaking Barriers podcast. This is one I've been looking forward to for some time, and just heard so many good things about you and the innovation and things that you've done. I'm going to give the audience a little bit of history, how I even learned about you, because, I'm a pretty small Midwest kind of Southeast Iowa farm kid. And so my world was pretty small growing up. And we didn't, if you didn't come to the Kelowna area and pull with Ernie Ropp, we probably didn't know you too well. So
yeah,
that was kind of our history. And then Kirk, oh gosh, drawing a blank now.
Kurt Paulson.
There you go. So Kurt Paulson gave me your name and connected me with your granddaughters, and really spoke highly of you and some of the things that you did in Western Iowa for the sport of tractor pulling, which is what this podcast is about, to really visit with the pioneers in the sport and learn what it is that they did and the things they went through. And so he just felt like you would be able to share a lot of history. And if we don't record these things, sometimes people come up with a better version that's not too accurate and they kind of forget about it. And I'm a history buff myself, so I always believe that if we don't learn from history, we're going to make the same mistakes in the future. Another gentleman that I visited with just this morning that gave me some information that we're going to have to cover is a gentleman by the name of Doug Bard. You know
Baird.
him? Baird?
Doug Baird.
Baird.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you know him. So we'll get to that. I really want to start, though, with you on what got you into tractor pulling in the very beginning to start with, and how old were you when you did that?
Okay. We had a local county fair, which is probably 10 miles from my farm, Mobile, Iowa.
Okay.
And the county fair decided to have a tractor pull, and it's so long ago that they actually had a wooden sled that the horses had pulled. And so I elected to go up and entered, got in. I and another gentleman did a full pull. And at that time, they had chalk marks with chairs, and men would step on the wooden sled.
Right.
And to give you an idea, Gary, I ran in second gear my first time. And I and another gentleman both had full pulls, so we repulled. And I don't know if it's good or bad, because it started me on quite a spiral and a long road, because I ended up winning and I got the bug, and then started looking around the state of Iowa. And I think before I even go very far, I need to thank some people. Charlie Clift and Dave Hanson, two young boys that spent a lot of hours with me. And since you're involved in it, it takes a crew.
Yes.
It doesn't take one guy.
No.
And to throw weights and to do what we did and travel the miles we did, and to give you a little idea, so that you can compare it to what you've done and you've pulled, I went through a year, say in the early 70s, and I would have traveled through 12 states. I drove 10,700 miles and I had 37 hooks.
Wow, that's
So,
impressive.
yeah, so
A couple of
that gives you,
questions. I have a couple
that,
questions before we proceed because I want to kind
okay,
of keep this in order. So the
okay.
first thing I want to know is what tractor did you pull the first time you pulled?
Very first time with a 40/20.
Okay.
And
And is that what you took when you traveled all those miles when you got started then?
no, then I had a 40/10, then I started modifying that
Okay.
as we worked our way up through the motor changes. But I moved from a 40/20 to a 40/10 because of weight. It was the 20's a little heavier and the
Yes.
10's a little easier to modify.
Okay. One other question, that wooden horse drag that you talk about, because what I seen as a kid and what a lot of people did, we used in our area, we called them hay drags. And then men would step on the sled. Did they pre-weight this sled, and how did they stop you as you went down the track?
It was not pre-weighted, just had a long chain on it. And the best I can remember, Gary, the guys, two guys, one on each side, and they were about 10 feet apart. They
Right?
had taken a baseball chalk marker and made chalk marks.
Right?
And of course, we had 38-inch tires back in that day and age. We didn't have very big tires.
Right?
And running in second gear, you're moving at a rate that there's not a safety issue stepping off and on
Right.
the tractor. So that's kind of how I first started, and then we started doing injection pump work.
Okay. So when you did that first tractor pull, you got the bug. Did you start going to the 4010 right away? Was it the following year? And then how was that process?
Yeah, the 4010 just became the tractor to go pull with because the 20 would have a loader on it and it'd have other things, and so the 10 was kind of the utility tractor around the house. So
Right.
there wasn't a lot that had to be done to it to get to go pull. And yet both the motors were very comparable.
Right. Right. And so the first year you made that first pull, do you remember what year that was?
Oh my gosh. Uh, I'm going to have to guess a little bit, but I would say 64, 65 probably.
Okay. Good. And now I've got you saying numbers so we can have people jump on later and tell us you were wrong. That's usually what happens. Somebody knows the information better than we do.
I
So,
agree.
and
I
they
agree.
usually correct us. So from 64, 65, you pulled that 4020, and then you moved onto the 4010. And you were talking about, to move back forward to where you were talking about all those miles you traveled. Did that happen like the following year, like 66, 67? Like what was the progression?
The progression would be that I took that 4010 and heard about a tractor pull in Mapleton, Iowa. So I went over there, and there was two fellas there, Leo Ewell, who, by the way, tipped his tractor over backwards at one point, and Don Kirkpatrick, and they had went and got injection pump work done. So they had bigger rollers, and I didn't know anything about that.
Right,
So I came back home and went to town and had my pump worked on.
right,
The next pull I went to, I drove my tractor to the city park, took the field pump out, the Rusemaster, put my injection pump in, and then pulled, and then come back to the park and switch them back, and then drive the tractor back home. And then the next process was the towns would be in Sloan, Iowa. They would be in Hinton, Iowa. They'd be 20, 30 miles away. So I built a trailer for my pickup. And we started to haul the tractor.
okay,
And then we started to reach out a little bit further. And of course, I don't know how specific on motors you want me to go, but then we started uh, going to intercoolers. Then we started turbochargers. Um, do you want me to kind of keep going
Yeah,
here?
you can keep talking about that.
Okay. Then we kept getting stronger and stronger. And then I started traveling around the state with the biggest Ruse Master pump I could get built anywhere around the country.
Right,
And then I ended up going as far as the Iowa State Fair. And at that point, I met Isley and Old Cromie and John Klug and Carden. I started to meet the nucleus that was traveling the state, and then competed in that group and traveled around quite a bit. And then I don't know if I mentioned this before or not, but John Klug and I became really good friends. We ended up buying and selling corn together. And if you can remember that, if you showed up and John Klug was at a pull, you better tighten your belt because John was tough.
right.
He run hard.
Yep.
Well, I got a little bit of splashed over onto my green tractor from that. He had a fella out of Chicago that helped John a lot, and that's why he
Yes,
was so competitive.
that's right.
And so on one of the times I'm at John's house, he said, "Come out to the barn." So I go out with him, and we're running the Ruse Master pump. And John reaches up on the bench and picks up a big inline Bosch pump,
Yep.
and it's international cream colored yellow. And he
Okay.
said, "This is yours. It's from Jerry in Chicago." But he said, "You got to paint it green." So I go home and redo the front of my motor and make it to where I can get that inline pump on. And then that was another huge step. And then I started to be competitive anywhere I wanted to go. And then we went to intercoolers.
Well,
And
quick on
then
that though, the how fast was this progression happening? Were you making these jumps, like from no turbo to turbo, and was this happening every year? What was a bit of the process going through all of that?
a lot of times you break things and then you fix them.
Right,
And then you hear about something and 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 you're just constantly changing. So to give you a progression and a step level one to the other, sometimes it was because you broke this or that happened or you were here or there. And my example of that would be Van Botkins, who ran the Cajun Queen out of Mexico, Missouri. Uh, I get down around Des Moines, and this is at the time that Hal Isaacs, who Air Research was helping Van, stage turbos. I had never seen turbos staged before.
right.
And so I got a feel for that and then visited with Isaacs at Air Research and then started to stage turbos together.
Okay,
And I have a little story on that too. I'm in Indianapolis, the Indy Pull, and I'll try to Gary Benthauser, Dave Benthauser. It was a man that had won the Indy Pull a couple of times,
right,
and he came through the pits, and I'm down in the pits, and I had a 200-pound gauge on my intake manifold with a telltale tack on it, a
right,
telltale, and he came through. And remember, he's running Offenhausers at the Indy 500, and
right,
they're running 27 pounds of boost with wastegates. And he got up, looked at my tractor, and he said, "Why you got that 200-pound gauge on there?" And I said, "That's because I run between 120 and 130 pounds of boost." And he looked at me like, "You goofy farmer, you know."
yeah,
Uh, so I went down through the track and I'm in first place. And a lot of the winter pulls, Louisville and them, if you're first place, they take you off to the side of the track and leave you there until somebody takes you out of that position.
right,
And so the real sweat box time is you're in first place, the pull's over, now you're going to the scale. And you're hoping you didn't pick up mud and other things, but they pull me up on the scale and give me a thumbs up. And I felt my chair that I'm sitting in go back, and Benhauser's looking right over my shoulder. And he said a few cuss words. He could not believe the boost that we ran. And compared to other motorsports around the country, I think from that point on, we set benchmarks that nobody else matched anywhere.
Right.
Um, I even split a intercooler once with
Really?
too much pressure on it.
So
Yeah.
that intercooler, was that like something you were finding off of some industrial equipment, or was it something you made? What was up with, I mean, what type of intercooler did you use?
Well, I had a John Deere one to start with, and I found a can't even remember what I got that off of, but that's the one I cracked. So then I had to go back home and re-weld it, re-put it together, and then we would run a separate pump, uh, like on a garden hose style pump. So when we came into town, I had another tank, and we'd buy two bags of ice, and we filled that tank full of ice and then water, and then I would pump ice water through my intercooler to get me cool the air coming off from
Right.
the turbos so that we could carry more oxygen.
Right. How many
And
turbos were you running at that point then when you went
I
to the
started
intercooler?
out with two, went to three. A few of the guys went to four, and then they said, "Hey, three's it." And so you can imagine the tubing underneath the hood, just trying to get all that stuff put together. It was pretty ugly to look at,
Right.
but
Well, I
uh,
know some of them went to four turbos for a while. I think even today, most of the super stock tractors are back to about three, and they figured out how to stage them that way and get them to be most effective. Just curious, we want to get into some other lighter stories and some other things then as well, but just curious of a couple of things. One, what was the name of your tractor for those folks that maybe remember you pulling?
uh, in the early years, really didn't have a name, but I had a black hood and always had silver paint,
Okay,
silver fleck paint in it. And then, later on, I went to alcohol. I was one of the first guys to
right.
board, stroke, and go to alcohol. And then we called it Spark-aholic.
Okay. So, what classes did you run back when you first went to the state fair and started going? I mean, I'm going to just assume this, but I want a clarity on it. Did you run with the ITPA? They were kind of the big organization in the state at the time.
Yes, I was a member on the rules committee. I was one of the beginning founder members of the ITPA,
Okay.
and Betty and Jerry kind of ran that pretty much.
And that
They
was
did all
Betty
the
and Jerry Fornash. She was
Yeah,
the
they did the
secretary.
paperwork.
Yeah, if you can
Yeah.
pick up any of those old magazines in the 70s, I believe in 76, she wrote and I just want to reference this, she wrote a really good article about you tractor pullers and what a fine group of farmers and, what you do for day jobs. And, the thing that I find interesting that I like to point out to people, I would say back in the day, 90% of you guys were farmers.
Without a doubt.
And today it's completely flipped. It's
That's what
probably
I've heard.
yeah, it's majority are small business owners or business owners of some type often, and they can
Wow.
be other hobbies, or other, employees and things, but they're not. It's typically farm kids, that still came off the farm, but it's a lot. It's amazing how many of those folks don't farm. I mean, if they do, it's more of a hobby. It's a second deal for them. So it's just interesting to see how that's changed. But it's really appreciative to you guys for the efforts you put in. Tell me some funny stories. You got anything like at the state fair that happened? You're kind of the new guy. Did they have to initiate you a little bit, or
Well, I'm not sure about initiations, but when you show up the first time and you see all these different people here, your eyes are about the size of silver dollars.
right,
Uh, you're in awe of everybody,
right,
and so talking about the stories. One of them could be Al and Linda Swanson. Al ran a couple of Chevys out of Spencer or Royal, Iowa. And in fact, Linda was secretary of the Spencer Fair.
okay,
And we're at the state fair. We're parked out in the middle ground somewhere, and it starts raining. And in that day and age, there were very few hotels around. A lot of us slept in our trucks or had campers on them, and I hear a banging on my pickup, and I look out, and it's Al Swanson. He said, "Get up," and I said, "What for?" And he said, "We're going to Nebraska." He said they'll cancel the poll for a couple of days here. So you get up middle of the night, get everything ready. We head to Nebraska. Davy Thomas, Jerry Russell, Bill Hunter, and myself. And we get out there and we called that brush pulling because those guys didn't have a chance if we showed up.
Right.
And so we get out there and we pull that night. Hunter broke down. So I put his tractor on at an angle and mine at another angle. So now I've got two loaded. And the guy's selling watermelons. So I bought a bunch of watermelons there. And boy, we all ate watermelons real hard and got back in, started down the road in a little while. And that was the day of the CB when we still talked on the CB.
Right.
And Swanson hollered at me and Al said, "Pull over." I said, "We got to keep going. We can't be pulling." He said, "You got to pull over." So I pulled over, pulled up alongside, and he got out. And Gary, he was soaked from his belly button all the way to his knees. And I said, "What happened to you?" I'm kind of making fun of him. He said, "It's your fault. My daughter Pam ate too much watermelon and sat on my lap. She's been wetting on me."
Oh my
So,
goodness.
so that was a funny story. Of course, we had to dry. He had no dry clothes, And so we go on down the road and head for the state fair again.
So when you said they paused the state fair, what was the reason for that? Just
It
rain?
had rained that night.
Okay. So you guys decided to go find something else to do and come back.
Yep, run out there, and you would. You were almost guaranteed a couple of trophies and a couple of
Right.
checks, and they like to see us come.
Right.
Uh, they called me several times, like Colorado. When I first started going to Colorado, they called and asked me to come out there because they wanted to see the faster tractors run.
Right.
And at that time we were running road gear then,
Right.
so we were. I tried to go through and do a few metrics on that, and if we take a 30.532 and the John Deere in eighth gear, and I turned about 7,200 RPMs when I was on the alcohol. That's right at 80 mile an hour. So we're turning them tires pretty hard.
Right. Right. I would love to do the metrics on that today because I know we're a fair amount above road gear now, but I can't even imagine what the guys with multiple chargers are doing. I mean, I'm still running a single charger tractor, so I imagine
Wow.
they're turning those tires really hard. I mean, you
Wow.
can just hear them buzzing when they come down the track now. So very interesting. We're going to kind of go through a timeline and then jump back through a couple of highlights here that I've got. So I believe it was 76, if I'm right. Well, I know before we get to that, what classes did you run in?
I normally ran 7 and 9s,
Okay.
but you talk about stories. We go down to Missouri, and you'd pull into a little town, and there's a track, and there's 4 or 5 guys standing on the track, and it comes as no surprise. That's the committee that put the pull on.
Right.
And the reason them guys are out there on the track is they're trying to decide what the rules are going to be for that night. So if you went to Missouri, you could pretty well plan on not knowing for sure what the weight was going to be, what time it was going to start, but you could bet money it was going to be late at night before you headed back home. That was my catch on Missouri.
They weren't too timely, and they kind of made it as they went, huh? So I had to see who showed up to see what competition they were doing.
Yeah, they have a different clock than we've got up in Iowa.
Right. Well, there's a lot of good people. I've made a lot of good friends down there, and
Oh,
I think their technology and how they do those things has progressed a little since those days. I'm sure.
oh,
Uh,
without a doubt. Yeah, we would go to Bethany, Missouri a couple of times a year.
right. Uh, okay, I'm going to make a note here. I have you. I think it was in '76 that you won in Louisville. Is that correct? 75 95, somewhere in there.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Yes.
So you won, and when you won, you were running a diesel. And how many turbos, and what was a bit of the setup you had when you did that? Because that was kind of. Let me also ask this question. Two questions here. That when you went to Louisville, that was kind of the showcase of the best in the country. Am I right?
Yeah, and when
Okay.
that first started, they would only allow like 20 or 15. You had to apply to get in when they first started.
Well, they still do that. They still need
Oh,
to
they
apply.
do?
Yeah, you
Okay.
still have to apply, and then they kind of look at your record, and because they want to have a good show.
Yeah.
So,
And it is a good show.
so when you won that pull, leading up to that year, the season before, you were running with ITPA. Had you won any championships by then, or what was your history at that point?
We didn't have I can't tell you for sure if I had a point championship in Iowa or not. I had a couple of point championships in the national in NTPA,
Okay,
but I think the Iowa we just pulled. I don't remember counting points and
okay.
doing a lot of that then.
Okay. So most of you guys in Iowa were running for NTPA points, as I recall. I mean, that's kind of been what I'm hearing from others that I interviewed. They pretty much were running for the NTPA points, and some of the Iowa polls counted, and I think others were a little bit more fun.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was at. I ran the
Yeah.
NTPA, and I think I won two point championships um,
In what class?
in the seven.
Okay. So that was your specialty at the
Yeah,
time.
that was my spot. And we would as an example, did Louisville and then won Farm Fest and then won Fort Worth. You would kind of get everything clicking and get in the groove. And then I can remember at one time when Doug Ham kind of hit that groove. And you get within a couple foot of him, but you just couldn't beat him.
Right.
And
Right.
and so everybody kind of looked for that groove. And once you found it, then you stay right there until somebody starts knocking you around. And
Right. No, it's a great feeling when you can get into that groove. And of course, we've lost Doug now, but his son Mark
uh,
actually pulls a truck and runs with us quite a bit. And
really,
he's building a new house about 3 miles from where I live. And we'll have Mark
uh,
on one of these days to talk about his dad's stories. It's just kind of a process, and I'm trying to get people in different parts of the country too as we do this. So, how many turbos did you run, and what kind of fuel system did you have when you won Louisville?
I would have had the international inline Bosch pump on and one turbo at that time.
Okay, and clearly you were dominant. I mean, you were running well, but for some
I
reason you got a crazy idea. How did that hit you?
and you know how that happened. Uh, I should have not did what I did, but uh, because I was on top. I even remember John coming around and getting after me about I shouldn't change anything. But uh, you've probably heard of the G1000 that Dave Stangl ran on alcohol.
Yep.
And when Solid Junk showed up, I'm telling you, he put some horsepower out, and he surprised everybody. And so I felt that was the future that was coming. So that winter, I took a block and boarded a half and sent a crank to Chicago and stroked it a half, and I jumped to 577 cubes, put Minneapolis Moline pistons in. Uh, uh, Trying to think, I had to change the wrist pins, and
So,
then
what rods did you run if you were running Minneapolis?
I ran a John Deere rod,
Okay.
GMC wrist pins, Minneapolis Moline. In fact, I have one of the pistons here in this collage with a hole burned in it. I burned a lot of holes in pistons,
I imagine
and
you did in the beginning.
that was that's when I flipped switches, and now they've got computers and they can dial in things. But when that thing started to come alive, you couldn't hardly hit switches quick enough. But once
Right.
I finally did get dialed in, I went to Lincoln, Nebraska, and I got a adjustable pill that I could turn to jump from 70 to 60 and change my fuel. Well, then that evening I could check on what the humidity was, and so I started to get dialed in. And well, I'm telling you, for a while there, then I actually even ran with the seven modifieds one night. I didn't beat them, but I got up among them. So once the alcohol come alive, boy, it was fun. It was I was sailing high. The only
Well,
thing I couldn't do is I had the power, but if I'd go to nine and go to eighth gear, I'd break eighth gear.
okay.
So when I
So
go
how
to
long?
nine, I still got to stay in seventh gear, but I know I can't beat John or I can't beat some of the guys.
Right.
But I need that other gear.
So a couple of
But
questions on that. How long did it take you to get the alcohol dialed in?
oh, boy, too long.
Like over a year? It took you
I would
over,
say, yeah, about a
yeah.
year.
And just for
I
folks listening, I mean, and for your reference, you're right. You know, you were hitting switches to probably turn on water and everything else. Today,
Yeah,
that's all automatic with pressure switches. So everything
that
comes
that'd be
on, and we have lights
wow.
that come on and let us know if it's malfunctioning or not. So,
That would be so nice. Yeah,
right.
I had switches, and then I even for evenings that needed more, I dumped alcohol. I had two injectors in the turbo, and I could actually jump. We dumped water, still dumped water in, but I could dump more alcohol in if I thought I needed it. But once the
And
motor
you,
would take off, it would burn the piston so quick you just couldn't recover.
well, I was going to say that's why you got holes in pistons.
well,
When I hear stories about how you guys injected alcohol with your water, I am not shocked to hear about all the burnt pistons.
and the sad thing was we were such trial and error that there was no other motorsport running the boost we were running. I
Right,
ran about 60 pounds of Schweitzer Charger on alcohol, and that's a bunch on alcohol.
right, right.
But boy, when they come alive, they really flat scoot. And
Yep.
I'd hit about 7,100, 7,200 for RPMs.
Oh, wow. So you were turning some hard RPMs then too.
Oh, it flat one, it run, it hummed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What were you using for it? Go ahead.
I can remember running against Doug one day, and I bet I beat him 20 feet. And he just stood on his tractor, looked at me, and just shook his head like, "What am I going to do?"
And he was still running a diesel at the time?
Yeah, Doug
Okay.
never did jump over to alcohol. He
I
stayed
didn't
there.
think so. Right.
Yeah, and he was smart enough. So he had a stretch while I suffered for a year. He was probably the strong runner.
Wild Horse Productions is a company dedicated to promoting rodeos with dirt in your face and heart pounding action from start to finish. We promise to make our events an experience that will have you wanting to tell your friends about the time you had. Gage Bontrager Consulting is more than just a consulting firm. We're a team of experts committed to helping individuals and business through the complexities of their personal and professional development. We are dedicated to providing people the tools they need to learn, grow, and succeed, building a legacy of happy, healthy, and fulfilled lives. To learn more about us, you can find us at www.gagebontragerconsulting.com. This is something that's interesting to me. There's just this crowd of people that love black smoke. And I know when you're pulling a tractor or a truck, there comes to that point you want to win, and it's pretty much, everything, all bets are off. That's just what you want to do. Maybe that was never a big deal to you to blow smoke.
uh, I think I kind of relate it to the train that used to come into the town in the 1800s. Everybody could see that black smoke, and for 20 miles around, everybody came to town. Well, I
Right.
felt that was the way when I went out in Nebraska and Colorado and South Dakota. When I fired up, when I was running diesel, everybody headed to the track. Somehow that black smoke and that sound just attracts attention that the alcohol doesn't attract.
Right. No, it's interesting that it does that. Anyway, and then for as far as your head, I don't want to get into all the technical stuff too much. There's a lot of people that don't understand it, but I also know there's really a group of us pullers that enjoy knowing what you guys went through. When it comes to, did you run a different aftermarket head? Were you still running a stock head and just doing some work on it?
See, there wasn't even such a thing. I actually had my own turning lace, so I could redo my pistons. We had a short period of time on diesel where we decompressed because we just couldn't
Right.
keep the heads on. And so I could spin my own piston, had my own CC gauge, and I could change it. Well, then when I went to alcohol, then I could also do my pistons again. So I would relieve my pistons 10 thousandths down to the first ring. And we started doing some things like that. But as far as I guess the where you can, I had a diesel block and an LP head on a diesel block because
Okay.
there's no cross flow heads available for John Deere, and there's nobody with a machine that can make a head like you guys have got. So almost all of that stuff, we just had to cobble things together. So I actually ran an LP. When I went to alcohol, I ran an LP head on a diesel block.
Sounds good. I didn't know. I just know, like at some point Ernie Ropp went to some aftermarket aluminum head, and I didn't know if at some point you did tried some of those things as well.
I did
Um,
not do that.
okay. And
Yeah.
the thing that also, if you can get enough boost pressure and fuel to it, some of those things aren't quite as important, but today it still has a lot to do with how much air you can flow through a head and things like that. Let's jump into some other accomplishments that you had. I understand you were interviewed for the Sports Illustrated once. Tell us about that story.
Uh, I don't remember that much about it. And truthfully, uh, you would be at a pull and two or three people would come over to you and they'd interview and we talk a little bit, but you're at the pull and you're dirty and you're trying to win, and then they leave. And then later on, you might get a letter from them. Could we publish this or could we do that?
Right?
So some of that wasn't like they walk up and shake hands and say, "Hello, how are you? I'm so and so." Some of that was kind of third person as it came in, I guess you could say.
Okay. So you weren't, it
Uh,
wasn't like they had you sit down in a studio for anything then. They were,
no.
okay. Cause I know back then it was the Wild West of tractor pulling, and they, a lot of those magazines were just trying to get information. I mean, it was even early days of some motorcycle racing and different types of motorsports. But still, nonetheless, it was interesting that you were the type of person that would get a magazine like that to interview you. One of the other things, I mean, you talked about a little bit about your inline fuel, talked about diesel, but it's when you went to alcohol, you started to stack the turbos. And so, your first alcohol tractor, were you a single blower or did you go with two turbos? How did you do? What was the progression on the alcohol side?
On alcohol, I went to a single charger. I had a Schweitzer
Okay.
and stayed with that. That Schweitzer would stay together up to about 60 pounds.
Okay.
And so I never did do twins on the alcohol. Uh, there was such a learning curve to get it to come alive with what I was doing. And once it come alive, you were almost scared to touch it because if not, everything broke. To give you
Right.
an idea, I had Ramsco made my sleeves, chromalloy cast sleeves, and we're at an NTP pull in Garden City, Kansas, and I explode a sleeve, and then the rod beats the side of my block out,
Yep.
and so then you go home and start all over again.
Right.
And I went to Prince Hydraulic, and they made me solid steel sleeves, and then I ran Molly rings rather than steel rings to
Yep.
carry oil. So I just kind of flipped that to, but
Right.
that kept me. Does Daryl Dorsher and Lanny Kay, them names mean anything to you?
I've heard those names. I have met so many people in the last 12
Okay.
months that I've got pages of notes with how they're connected and how I met them, but I cannot tell you much about them. I've heard the names.
Well, they're both real characters. They both look like walking beer kegs. They had a lot of hair and pretty round and wore t-shirts, and Lanny wore tennis shoes with no socks. Always wondered if he ever owned any pair of socks. But Dorsher had two Ed Pink Chrysler Hemis, and they were big and stout.
Right?
And I can remember we were at a pull someplace. He got on the phone and called out there, and I can't remember who he was talking to, but he said, I need more horsepower. And they said, well, you got the same motor Prudhomme's got, the same thing Gartlett's got. He said, you back that dragster up to a house and wrap a cable around the house, then turn it loose. That's the kind of power I need. That's the kind of guy Dorsher was. He just no holds barred when he pulled. He was a hoot.
He wanted all of it. So if you ran one turbo on alcohol, I know you were up to three turbos. That was all diesel then when you were doing the multiple turbos.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. I stayed
Okay.
staged turbos and diesel, and I suffered the first year to get the alcohol to go. I would try to change one thing at a time. And to give you an idea, I went to Cherokee, Iowa, burned a piston. That's about 60 miles from my farm, drove back home. We had a cherry picker, picked the head up, put a new piston in, and that night go to Missouri Valley and pull that night with another piston in the motor. That's how hard we worked trying to
Oh,
get
that's
everything to
amazing.
go.
No, that's
And
amazing. I feel like most of the guys in your era did a lot of the work themselves. So those are the things that happened a lot. Today, it's not quite so much that way. There's a lot more engine builders and things out there, but
Gary, we just didn't have the resources you have today. And so when you went to the telephone, you were talking to normally the guys you competed with. And to find that kind of a shop where you could walk in and say, okay, now I did find a guy in Moriarty, New Mexico, who would polish the head and port it for me. But to find a guy like that, he was a needle in a haystack.
right, right.
Where
There just
today
wasn't
you,
there just wasn't any technology back then. That's what's so unique about all of this. And then I know
well,
we talked about the National Farm Machinery Show in Louisville, and you won it. How many times did you go down there?
twice.
Okay.
Went the first year, and the second year I won, and then never went back again.
So you never want to take the alcohol back down there and show them how that's done, huh?
I got into alcohol and finally struggled, and then I took a year off and
Okay.
actually rodeoed. I rode bulls and bulldogged, and after about a year, I missed pulling so much I came back and started at it again. And then at that point, and when I got that adjustable pillbox, I still remember getting at it, Lincoln coming back, bolting it all on. I missed the 7 class. I went to the 9, went seventh gear, went down through there, and I run hard. And I can still remember Jerry Fornash coming over, and he said, Fred, you're finally there. And then from that point on, we were dangerous.
Right. It
In
just
the
kind of
set.
like a switch hit
Yep.
and it was game on. Well, that's always fun, and I'm sure you could feel that almost in the seat of your pants when you're driving the tractor. You can just, I mean, that's what I hear other pullers say, and I know for myself, you can feel you can probably, and I don't know if people that don't ever sit in the seat understand this, but when you're making that pass, you know about mid track. If this thing doesn't
Oh,
blow up, you're the one to beat, and you can
yep.
just you can feel it. So it's
I,
interesting how that works.
I would say you can feel it in your bone, in your psychic. Once I'm about 40 feet out, 50 feet out, I can pretty much tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah. Nope. I always tell people by the time I come off the clutch, I know what's going to be the end result, but bar
Oh,
something breaking. So
clutches. We
let's go
went
back.
through clutches.
Yeah.
We went through clutches for a long time. And I was one of the first guys that called Ray Crower in California. Do you guys still run a Crower clutch 4 disc?
Absolutely.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I'll be darned.
Yeah. Yep. That's what
That,
we're running. And we run, Darren Roush over just across the Iowa line into
wow.
Illinois sells more Crower clutches than any other Crower dealer in the United States. And,
You know, that stopped I fought clutch problems and ran Alice Chalmers. They kind of had a real rough clutch we could get. But once I got that Crower clutch, wow, you talk about a huge difference. And of course, it lets you slide out in a high gear too.
right, right. So it was basically a pedal clutch or a slipper clutch back then, which,
It
do you
was
know
a
what kind?
pedal clutch, and then you put weights on it. It had fulcrum weights on the
Yep.
out edge, and you
Okay.
put weights and bolts there, and then keep dialing it in, and then it would just shove you off the clutch like at
Yep.
26, 2700, something like that.
Yep. Nope. I understand exactly how those work. That's
And they
interesting.
do work.
Yeah, they work real well. You also made some other real big pulls outside of Louisville. And one thing that I find interesting that we don't really have, I'm learning a little more about it, but I know like the Unidome in Northern Iowa used to have a pull. I think you went down to the Astrodome in Houston. That was a big pull. What were some of the other indoor events that you went to?
Of course, went to Louisville. Indianapolis would have an indoor one. Kansas City, the American Royal would be indoor. The Indy pull would be an indoor pull. And then probably the pull, I don't know if it's still out there or not, but called Farm Fest. And it was a national pull, but that was one of the big pulls in the country also.
Okay. All right.
And that was up in the edge of Minnesota. They'd move it around, but it'd be in Minnesota. But I won Farm Fest also.
Okay. And so then in Indianapolis, where did they have the pool at that point in time? What building,
You
do you
know,
know?
we were inside of a building, and I just can't tell you.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I know there was a period of time outside of Indianapolis in the small town of Cloverdale. I know the NTPA ran in there some at one time, which is where Clint Tucker's group had their pull this winter. But I know there were some others in Indianapolis, and it looks like you won there as well. Was that with diesel or alcohol?
Some of them I can't remember for sure,
Okay.
Gary.
Well, the
Uh,
kid just said you had won there, so I wanted to point out that milestone, and I know how it
I
runs
was
together.
I was extremely blessed for a period of time
Right.
there. I just seemed
Well,
to.
I can tell you this, you must clearly be a man of character from everything I've heard. And I just looked down through some other things here. It looks like you won some sportsmanship awards for several years. Just so the audience knows, those are awards that your competitors vote on for who should deserve that. It just tells me a lot about your character and who you were as a person. So I just want to highlight that. It's very well deserved that you get
Uh,
that.
you
So
know, you do win a lot of awards. So when you get as old as I am, and you're up in the 80s, you've won a lot of awards over the years. But I probably value the sportsmanship award more than any. Um,
absolutely.
when you go to the annual meeting and win that, that's the cream of the day.
Well, I tell people this that I work with quite a bit. We can always find success financially. We can have all the accolades from winning, but at the end of the day, if you don't have friends, if people don't like you, you really failed at life. And so to see everything everybody said, I can understand how much that meant to you, which tells me also why people liked you so well, because you did care about your character and how you treated others. So, and you are exactly right. I'd trade everything I have to make sure I have good character. So that's an important that's important to anybody listening to this, to be that type of person. And so I think you
Well,
set a heck of an example, Fred.
yeah, and I think somehow it was uh, it's I don't ever remember guys getting naughty and getting ridiculous with each other, but it seemed like you battled the skid as much as you battled your opponent.
Uh-huh.
And there was a few times I seen guys be ridiculous, but in general, everybody you could go over and ask another guy. And I think since we were at the nucleus or at the beginning, everybody was trying to improve. And so if you come ask me, hey Fred, what housing do you think I ought to try? I'll tell you, and
Right.
that's just how it was, you know.
Right. I think some of
Uh,
that's changed a little bit today because part of it is people don't work on them themselves quite as much as they once did. And so, the competition's tighter maybe than what it once was.
yeah, and
I
I'll
think
bet
the
so.
thing that I see with you guys were very aware that if you can get a crowd there, I mean, you were all promoters as well, and you wanted a good show. You wanted to have good competition, and we do
Yep.
too. It's just, but it's easier to be consistent today than it was back then because we're buying parts that other people have already proven. There's things that have
Yeah.
been dynoed and proven, and we know that they're going to work. So I got a story I've got to ask you about that I want you to tell me. Is that looks like you one time fixed a tractor under a street light and might have been in the rain.
I wonder where you got that, but yeah. Do you remember M&W, a company that made big wagons and
Oh yeah.
turbos?
Yep.
Okay. Well, we're in Bowling Green, Ohio at the M&W show, and I break road gear, and I carried splitting stands with me, and yes, I and Charlie, the middle of the night with a light rain, take that tractor apart and fix eighth gear and put it back together so we can pull the next day.
Oh, that's amazing.
I'm surprised you knew that story.
Well, I'm sure nobody's carrying splitting stands with them today because that's probably past what they would do. That's incredible. How'd you do the
Yeah,
next day?
I don't even remember.
Yeah,
And that was the other thing. We got all put together, and we had a crew cab pickup then, and we hopped in. And by the way, there's a story on Charlie snoring, but we
right.
started down the road, and we're just tired. I pulled over, and pretty soon, bang, bang, bang on the window, and I roll it down, and it's a patrolman. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "We're taking a nap." He said, "You ain't taking it here." So here we were. We had worked in the rain, and now we got a cop telling us that we've got to go somewhere else and park. And so that was a long, long night.
Yeah, those
Uh,
are those are long nights. They're the ones you never forget and
uh,
you enjoy.
the name Kenny Brabeck. Do you know that name?
Oh yeah, they
Okay.
had uh, they had an Alice, right? And maybe two for a while, if I recall.
Denny and Allen had a smaller 175, and then Kenny ran the D21. But we're up in Minnesota somewhere, and we go to City Park, and we get in and go to bed. And this Charlie, the kid that helped me, snored unbelievably bad, world class snorer. And in the morning, we get up, and Kenny comes over, and he says, "I got up in the middle of the night." He said, "I thought we had a bear in the campground." He said, "I got up and got to walk around, and it was Shardy snoring in your pickup." He said, "I could hear him in my camper from your
Oh my
pickup."
goodness. Well, and just a little history on that D21. It came out of Kelowna, Iowa. That was Ernie Ropp's tractor before he went to John Deere.
Wow.
You didn't
Yeah, I
know
remember
that?
I didn't know it was that one, but I know he
Yeah.
had, Ernie
Yep.
had the 21, and then he had the John Deere painted kind of a cream color for a
He
while.
did. Yep. If
And
you go back to our episode with Warren Ropp, he talks about that, and he talks about the Brayback brothers and buying that tractor. So uh,
oh, I didn't know
it's
that. See?
interesting how all you guys worked together and helped each other.
Just a little side note, but
There's
a fella did the painting and put
you're
the iron
breaking up
elk on
just
the
a little
side.
bit, so let's just pause and let it catch up there. Go ahead. What was that?
Okay. Uh, Ernie had a guy paint the iron elk on the side of his unit or his tractor. And if you
Right.
walked back at the clutch and stood there, and you'll need to ask Warren or Phil or Myron, but if you'd walk back to the clutch and look at it, you'd swear them eyes are looking at you. And then if you'd walk clear to the front and turn around and look back, you'd swear them eyes turned and now they're looking at you. I don't know how that was ever done, but that was a fun thing we used to do alongside Ernie's tractor, to walk back and forth and watch
Watch the
the
eyes move.
the
You know, they,
illusion of the eyes.
right. You know, and the incredible part with all that is uh, Warren and Myron and Phil made those side panels and had an artist paint that for them, and they presented it to Ernie for Christmas. So again,
Wow.
that's just a story we had on their show and what they did. So there was just a lot of history with all of that. There's a
Well,
go ahead.
we used to stay with Ardith and Ernie in their house. And my
Yeah.
youngest, Ardith with just boys, and then I had a youngest daughter. So my youngest daughter, Hope, and Ardith were best buddies, and they used to head out together
Well,
and
good.
do lots
Yeah.
of things. And my youngest daughter still remembers Ardith.
Yeah. They were such
They,
wonderful people,
they were
and
great people.
those boys had so much respect for their parents. Another one, and this might be the one where you talked about the piston, but there was a pull where you blew up, you came home, and you installed a new motor in the afternoon and left for another pull. Was that the story you just told me about the piston, or was there another time you put a whole complete new motor in it?
No, that was the one with just a piston. So we just
Okay.
run home and threw another
Yeah.
piston in. Garden City is where I beat the whole side of the motor out.
Yep.
That was pretty bad.
Yeah, there you'd have had to have another block and everything there.
Yep,
The
had to
other thing I'd
stop.
like to ask you about, you've got a bunch of pieces in a shadow box on your wall. Can you tell me a little bit about those pieces and what that represents?
Uh, are you talking about this over here?
Probably so.
Okay, and when you're saying pieces, uh, when you pulled as long as I did, you would take home one or two trophies a day,
Right,
and then down in the basements where the most of them went, so for about 3 feet out from the wall would be just be solid trophies all the way around the basement. And on this deal, my children went in and took off like the sportsmanship
right,
uh, plaque and the one off of. So these here are like Louisville, Indy Pull, Sportsmanship Award. They're some of the uh, higher valued, I guess. Or
right. The ones that were near and dear to your heart, and it was easier for you to
yeah,
take those with
this
you.
is a picture here from a newspaper down in Louisville of showing me when I won.
Okay.
And and the other funny thing is that I hadn't thought about, but look at some of my pictures, and I got a straw hat on. And what am I wearing today, Gary?
Another straw hat. Must be your trademark.
Evidently, I'm surprised.
So you clearly, when you did your first pull, that was just a county fair, a local event, uh, and then you kind of got involved as you started to, modify your tractor and take the next step. You uh, kind of moved into getting to run with the ITPA and NTPA, and that's really what you did for the rest of your career. Is that right?
That's right. I uh,
Okay.
I I was in the association from then on.
So when you kind of ended your career in tractor pulling, uh, were you still helping promote some brush pulls? Were you a part? I
Hello.
mean, I know now over in Western Iowa and into Nebraska, they have the Outlaws. I mean, I know these clubs have changed a lot. Was that after your time in the sport?
Yes. I was NTPA or Iowa, and those other units, other groups had not really started up.
Okay. Well, and I think those groups, from what I'm learning, primarily started out of the vacuum of, let's say, the ITPA. And I know for a while, Missouri Tractor Pullers Association kind of, I think, even did a magazine with the ITPA for a few years. And, the states kind of organized under the NTPA. And so I see how some of that, as that changed, then these other groups started. I also want you to tell me the story of how you would sharpen tires.
Oh, that's funny. Well, there is an actual tool called a grooving tool that's been sold for years, and it's electric. You plug it in, it gets hot. But what I'm with Jerry, and we're talking about it. And so you know how you can cut wood, but if I give you a knife and you have to push it through the wood, it's really difficult. So
Right.
we're sitting there talking, and Jerry says, "How about if we turn that knife around backwards?" Well, I said, "How are we going to do that?" So then I got to think about it. So I took a piece of 3/8 copper tubing, built a handle, and then we took the electronic head and turned the blade backwards in that. And then you could just like a draw knife, you could just go up to a tire and man, I could just pull chunks off of the tire. Well, then we're at the Lincoln State Fair, and when you grind with a surface grinder, your tires would get kind of hot.
Right.
And I found a 6-inch disc that was used to shape poly and plastic uh, molds out in California. And it was $6 for that disc, but it was full of titanium needles. And so the rubber wouldn't get hot, but the needles would eat the rubber off. And so I'm at the Lincoln State Fair, and Al Swanson's there, and I open it up, and he sees what I got on my grinder. And he said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, ain't nobody supposed to know about these, Al." And he said, "Well, here, let me see one." So he gets it, and I had bought 20 of them. And he said, "Let me show these few people." And pretty soon Al's gone. And I mean, in about 30 minutes, he's back and he hands me a handful of cash. And I said, "Where's my disc at?" He said, "I sold them all, Fred. You're going to have to buy some more." So that's kind of how our tire cutting came. And then Wayne Longnecker, do you know Wayne?
Oh yeah, I watched him
Okay.
pull a lot when I was young.
Okay. My first set of 30.5 32s I bought from Wayne. And I think he probably, of the whole group, is the most creative motor designer there is. The guy can take and shape and change. And so I've always been good friends with Wayne. We had a lot of fun together. And like I say, my first set of 30.5s came from Wayne Longnecker,
So those were not double cuts. You were just taking ag tires and
cutting them down.
cutting the
Yeah,
lugs down.
there were no pulling tires at the time.
Right.
And it's probably 2:30 in the morning, and I'm out in the shop grinding tires, sharpening them up. And I did have a neighbor pull in and say, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I got to pull tomorrow. I want my tires sharp." He said, "You probably have the worst problem with moderation I've ever seen before."
Well, that's part of what makes a person competitive and successful in life when
Yeah,
you're
I
looking
think
for
you're
that
right.
edge. And a
I
lot of
think
times
you're
it's
right.
those little details that make all the difference. It's not just one thing.
Yeah,
Um, so you never did run double cut tires the whole time you pulled.
no, they were not available at that time.
Okay. But you don't recall pulling them down the highway or anything then to sharpen them?
Oh no, I had disc and cutters, and
Okay.
so
Okay.
we'd sit there and do it by hand. And
Right. No, and I know that's I mean, it's still the same type of method they use to this day. I mean, they've got some more modern equipment than what you folks had back then, but um, I guess
another.
there's one thing I have a question. I know we hit on this just a little bit. You were nearly the first tractor that I'm aware of that went to alcohol. I think you mentioned one name earlier, but when you won in Louisville, that tractor was on point and you really were on top of your game. And you kind of went against your own advice, how you said once you feel you're in a groove, you got to stay in the groove until somebody bumps you out. But it doesn't seem like you were very moderate or patient, and you went ahead and took a big jump. Uh,
Oh,
so I guess when I look at all that, what were there others that you were starting to hear talk about going alcohol, or what was the process that put you down that path?
no, I was on diesel on top of my game and had won 3 of the big pulls that winter. And there was a guy by the name of Clyde Sattel in Sioux City, Iowa, who ran the Coors Dragster.
Okay.
And so we were friends and we talked. And he was real interested in what I was doing. But he's telling me how much more power alcohol does and how much easier. And then after watching Stangle get that 1,000 to run, so then I thought it is possible. And there's no question I should have not changed as soon as I did. There's no doubt about that. It caused me a year of pain, but the fruits of when it started to run, that night that Jerry come over and said, Fred, you got it, uh, it was worth it. And then to be even let's see, how could I say it politely? But even being so brave as to ask to get in the modified 7,000 group and run against modifieds, that's how hard we were running. And I didn't
Really?
beat them, but I got up among them.
Right.
And of course, Doug and Ron Warskow and Kenny Braybeck, and them guys didn't have a chance against me in the seven then.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
I,
Do you have any idea what horsepower you would have had back then? Was there any way you guys dynoed anything?
You know, we no, we dinos weren't available, and the ones we had would just slip,
Right.
and so the only thing we could really do was see what other motors did, and then take our cubes. And when I tell you I was 577, cubes are cubes,
Right.
and that is a lot of horsepower.
Well,
There's
and it's pretty
very,
amazing to have that kind of cubes and turn the RPM you turn.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And again, that tells you for that time when that baby started to hum, I almost felt like I could beat a modified. I mean, the thing just run amazingly strong
Right.
and and was fun.
Right.
But for a
Well,
year, it was terrible for a year.
well, certainly once you got that dialed in, you inspired a lot of tractors. And it came a point in time where the diesel tractors struggled to keep up with the alcohol tractors in that light limited class. And it may still be the case today in some cases because those tractors were so strong.
At the pull that I'm talking about, Doug come down and Doug was running and he was beating about everybody. And I bet I was 20 feet ahead of him. And he sat there and just shook his head and looked at me like, uh, I I don't know what to do, you know? And
Right.
that's how strong
Yeah.
we were running. And,
Right.
but I went through a lot of pain to get there. Uh,
Right. Well, tell me this. Obviously, you've got a lot of accomplishments. You broke a tremendous amount of ground. You influenced a ton of people. Tell me a little bit about your family and how involved they were with you in the tractor pulling.
yeah, well, my son rodeoed a lot. And
Okay.
so the area that I'm from is where the Iowa High School rodeo is, and everybody's a cowboy, kind of
Right.
where I grew up. But my oldest daughter, she loved tractor pulling. And to give you an idea, she would run the feeler gauge when we're setting valves. And
Okay.
so that day we come back from Cherokee and we had to drop the pen and pull a piston. And I can remember sitting there and I'm sitting there with the wrenches and we're going as fast as we can go. And so in general, probably my oldest daughter spent a lot of time with me. She was much like Ralph Mathis. Dee went with Ralph almost everywhere he went.
Okay.
And and my daughter, if I was down at the other end of the track and I'm getting close to pulling, she'd come hunt me up and say, "You better get up there. You're about up, you know." So
Right. Right.
she'd get right after me. But she really enjoyed pulling. The youngest daughter sold programs and did things, and then my son, he was a rodeo boy, and so he didn't participate in the pulling event as much. He did
Right.
a lot of rodeoing.
Right. Well, that's interesting. It's just your wife probably was somewhat supportive, I would imagine, of all your escapades there.
Absolutely, you'd have her and the three kids in the pickup, and she rode along everywhere we went,
Right.
and
And that was, I'm sure, a single cab pickup back in those days.
yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Yeah. No, it's pretty interesting, the trailers and how you guys transported them, and interesting how far you guys would drive them in the beginning just to get to a tractor pull before you had ways to haul them. And So there's definitely been a lot of change there. Uh, Doug, and I'm going to try to say his name correctly. Doug Bard, is that right?
Baird.
Baird. Okay, Doug Baird. He said to tell you that it's your fault that he got into tractor pulling. Do you have any stories on Doug?
Uh, no, I really don't. He had older uncles that loved tractor pulling, and of course they drug him to all the tractor pulling. That's what he's really talking about. I think his
Well,
uncles Tiny and his other two uncles, they just loved tractor pulling, and they grab him and bring him to all the pulls, and so he was kind of forced to show up, I guess. But by
it
the way,
sounded like he hung around. Go ahead.
he's a very talented young man.
Right. He's clearly enjoyed it and was around you and admired you for it. And I know how that as a small boy, you have a local hero, and it often, that's I'm sure I know that's why I'm in tractor pulling, just because of Ernie Ropp, and you watch all those things happen. So, and then of course to hear Kurt Paulson talk about you and how you inspired him to pull tractors, and it seems like he's pulling kind of the same thing, just a newer version of what you have. And I'm sure the technology has changed tremendously from where you're at to what he's doing. But it's fun to see that you inspired people like that. And as we talk through all these accomplishments, if you could, off top of your head, just tell me, and this doesn't have to have anything to do with tractor pulling, what's the greatest accomplishment that you've ever had in your life?
I'm not sure I can do the greatest, but you've heard of the sport racquetball,
Yep.
and and I've won the regionals in the United States 8 times. I've been ranked number one in my weight division in the United States, and so probably some of my best accomplishments physically is winning the regional tournaments in Houston, Texas, and it's quite a bit different, but I just loved racquetball, played a lot of racquetball. So that's
Interesting.
pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah, well, it is. I played some racquetball back in the day, and today the sport seems to have kind of changed where a lot of folks play pickleball, which is a version between racquetball and tennis a little bit.
Yeah,
One of the
my
things I was
problem
going to
there,
ask you, go ahead.
my problem there is I'm in my 80s, and there's not enough air to play them sports today.
I know the lungs don't like us like they used to, for sure. Another
you
question I wanted to ask you, though, that I know a lot of guys did and have different stories on how they did it. When you were building these tractors, how did you test or tune the tractor before you got to the track?
okay, and that's quite the stories too. We had no skid, so you go out on the road and put it in road gear and kind of get after it a little bit. And it got to where it was scary because the tractor would spin and the tractor would hit, I don't know, 50, 60 mile an hour pretty fast. Got scary. So one day we decided, and we're going to, and I had a new 4440, and we got a chain about 50 feet long and hooked that to the 4440. Charlie got in there, and then I put it in road gear, and he was to kind of feather the brakes and let me build a little bit of boost, but just drag him down the road.
Right?
And that thing came alive so quick. And each time I started the tractor, the neighborhood would kind of show up. And
Right?
everybody is screaming and hollering, and I stopped, got the clutch in, stopped, turned around, looked. All the windows on the 4440 were gone. It had spun and just threw rocks at it and just broke all the windows. And Charlie was all crunched over down underneath the steering wheel trying to keep from getting. He said it sounded like a machine gun shooting at him.
I'm
So
betting it did.
that was one of our crazy episodes.
Because I've heard stories of guys riding on the tractors. They'd have a test sled to try to tune it and things like that. And I know with your alcohol, you had a little bit more tuning than you would have on a diesel. Were there any stories like that that you did?
Well, No, not really, other than knocking all the windows out of a new tractor and scaring yourself, getting
Right,
going really fast, quick, and
right.
so we decided that was a good way to die, is what that was going to be.
So that was the end of the taking it on the road and making passes down the road.
No more of that.
Right, right. Well, Fred, I
That's
just want
fun.
to thank you so much for joining
Ah,
us. I know you are so impactful in the sport of tractor pulling, and it's something a lot of people enjoy today. It's certainly changed some. It's probably become a little bit more commercial, but when you look at car racing and some of those things, one of the things I enjoy, and you just highlighted it and mentioned it when we were visiting, how much the tractor pullers get along. And I think we still see that sediment from the quality of your generation that really instilled that into us. I've been involved in car racing, and it usually involves a lot more fists and beer cans than I've ever seen in tractor pulling, and even motorcycle racing. I did some, and it can get kind of aggressive there too. Not like car racing, so it tells you a lot about the character of the people that built that sport. And I personally want to thank you for all the time and the investment of money and things you did to create that ingenuity and put a performance on that attracts a lot of us younger folks into the sport. And it kind of gives me a responsibility. I feel that I need to pass that on to younger folks as well and keep that alive. It's just there's so much we learn when we compete. No different than when you were in racquetball. You learned a lot from the folks you competed with, and they learned things from you. And
yes.
so it's important that a lot of times I think I see folks, and we probably see in our world some division today, but a lot of it comes to they don't have purpose. And if they can pick up a sport, I don't care if it's tractor pulling, it can be racquetball, softball, anything, and find something to kind of take their mind and give them some purpose. And there's many other ways to do it. It really helps build character, and it's one way to feel value and how you can give back to society. So, having said all that, is there a closing thought you would like to give us?
Well, probably, excuse me a little bit. Uh, Probably my sadness is a good share of my friends aren't available to hear this. And I miss Ernie and John and Chick and all the guys. It's just sad, and I commend you for doing this, but it's sad to have to do it and to have so many of them gone when we're finally documenting some things that they did. And they were outstanding people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
But
I
I thank you
appreciate.
so much. My sadness is a good share of my friends are not here.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for complimenting me on that, and I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. Uh, I guess, do you have any stories about any of those guys you'd like to share?
Well, probably, but I need to think about a few. I just miss them.
Yeah. Well, and that's
Yes.
the thing. There's a couple motivations for me to do what I do today, and I think I can tell from your raw emotion. And now I'm going to get emotional. But I lost my dad when I was 15.
Wow.
And people often would come up to me and tell me time heals when you lose somebody close to you. And I can tell from your expression today, what I learned is time doesn't heal it. You learn to live with it. And we just have to take the time to really value all those memories, all those relationships. And what you did today, recording this, I can tell you is invaluable to your family. It's invaluable to your grandkids, to the friends you made, to the heroes that look up to you. And I just appreciate it tremendously. So God bless you. And thank you for taking this time to join me on this Breaking Barriers podcast, Fred. I
Well,
can't
thank
thank
you,
you enough.
Gary.
breaking barriers.